Hello, I'm Brian Vermeer. Welcome to this week's lesson. We're in the section of the book of Daniel that most people are familiar with, the account of Daniel in the lion's den in Daniel chapter 6. Daniel, remember, is a young man from Israel. He was Jewish, but was taken away to Babylon along with a lot of the other Jewish people. And now, as we read last week, the Babylonian Empire has been conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, and Cyrus has allowed many of the Jewish people to go home. He's allowed actually all of them to go home, back to Judea. However, Daniel, being in his probably mid to late 80s by this time, has decided not to take the journey, besides the fact he's a high administrator in the government and has a pretty cushy job, so he doesn't want to give that up. So Daniel is now working for the king. Cyrus has probably again established his capital not in Babylon, but further south. So he has set another regent named Darius, or Darius as we call him, in charge. We're not sure from history who this Darius is. We don't see that name. But he's the one in charge, at least, of this part of the kingdom. And the book of Daniel gives him the title king. So apparently he is the ultimate authority, except for High King Cyrus at this time. And we see that Daniel, is one of the advisors to Darius. But the other advisors have a problem with Daniel. And that problem is that Daniel does not worship their gods. Daniel does not follow their customs. Daniel has been there for 70 years now and is still following the Jewish God. He is still following the Jewish customs. And even though all the other Jews left, Daniel didn't leave. So they're probably a little upset with Daniel that he has such a high position, even though he is a foreigner and has elected to stay within the city of Babylon. So they have gotten together and come up with a plan to get rid of Daniel. They don't want to just ask the king to exile Daniel or execute Daniel, because Daniel is a favorite with King Darius. So instead, they're going to use Daniel's Jewishness as an excuse. They know that Daniel prays to God 3 times a day, because Daniel makes it known, let's say. Probably not intentionally. He doesn't do it for show. Daniel goes to his room 3 times a day. His room is upstairs where, people could see it, from the ground. And he opens his window, which faces west toward Jerusalem. And he looks out of his window and prays. And he probably does this just to look west, like Muslims today face toward Mecca when they pray. It's a symbolic gesture. He's praying toward, or in the direction of, where the temple would be, or in this case now where the rebuilt temple is going to be. So he's not doing it to show off. But the people know that he does it. They know that he prays to his own God. And the administrators are going to use this against him. Let's look in Daniel chapter 6, verses 6 through 10 at our first reading. It says, "So the administrators and satraps went together to the king and said to him, 'May King Darius live forever. All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days Anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. Therefore, your majesty, establish the edict and sign the document so that as a law of the Medes and Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed. So King Darius signed the written edict. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in its upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. So these advisors went to the king, and notice how they said it. They said, all of the administrators, everybody is agreeing to this. Everyone thinks this is a great idea. This idea is that the king should be the only one that people should pray to. The king should be the only one that people should ask things of. In other words, for the next 30 days, King, you are going to be God. That's what they're saying. And in this culture, that wouldn't have been, that big of a shock or anything. They had many gods, and to think of the king as a god is certainly not a foreign concept to them. But they're saying for the next 30 days, in order to help establish your authority, I guess that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to show these people of the former Babylonian Empire that now King Darius is in charge. So anyone who prays to any other god, anyone who doesn't do things your way, is going to be thrown into the den of lions. And they're doing this specifically to trap Daniel. Now, they're probably ending up trapping a lot of other people as well, but they don't care about that. They just want to get Daniel. They're letting a personal vendetta control, you might say, the policy of the nation. They are passing laws strictly because of a personal vendetta. Sometimes we may let personal feelings get in the way of what we know is right for business, or what we know is right for our families, or for our groups of friends. We need to be careful that we don't let our personal problems cause trouble among the larger group. Don't let your personal feelings get in the way of doing what's right. We know, for example, how we should treat other people. But, we're human. We don't always get along with everybody. There are people, even within my own church, that let's just say there are some that I would rather hang around with than others. And it's not because, I necessarily it's not because I hate that person. It's just that, I have a personality that maybe gets along better with that person than I do with that one. But I don't need to, or maybe, maybe that person in my church has done something that offended me. Maybe without knowing. Maybe that person has done something that I just don't like. Or maybe that person just has a personality that I clash with. I can't let my personal feelings, though, get in the way of doing what's right for the church, for the world, for other people, for my friends, for any other group. So just because you harbor ill feelings towards somebody, first of all, if you do, you need to ask God to help you get over that. You need to ask God to forgive you of those feelings. And if somebody has offended you, you need to go and make it up, with that person. But these people went to the king and they told the king, everybody has agreed to this. Now, whenever you hear the word everybody, odds are it's not everybody. Like a kid saying, well, everybody's doing this. Well, everybody may be doing it, but that doesn't make it right. Right is right, to quote something I've heard before, wrong is wrong even if everybody is doing it, and right is right even if nobody is doing it. The majority does not determine what is right and wrong. And this causes a problem, because if you don't believe in a higher power, if you don't believe in God, and this is something I bring up with people, who claim to be atheistic or agnostic, if you don't believe in a higher power or a God, then how do you define what's right and wrong? Because there's only so many ways you could define it. I define right and wrong based on my belief in God. What my right and wrong is what God says is right and wrong. I have a higher authority that I appeal to. If God says it's right, then it's right. If God says it's wrong, then it's wrong. But if you don't believe in a God, then how do you determine what's right and wrong? You really can't. You have no basis to determine right and wrong, because the only way you could do it would be either by majority. If the majority says it's right, then it's right. Or if it's wrong, then it's wrong. But there are many times we know that the majority is wrong. That's why we have minority rights in this country. That's why we have things to protect the minority. You can't say that, well, what's best for society is what's right. Because who is to say what's best for society? Adolf Hitler thought that what he was doing was what was best for society. And the majority agreed with him. So does that mean what he was doing was right? Were we wrong to condemn him for that? What it boils down to is, if you don't believe that God determines right and wrong, then your only other alternative is, I determine what's right and wrong. And if you say that man determines what's right and wrong, then suppose you have two people who disagree. Who is to say that one person's opinion of right and wrong is any better than any other person's opinion of right and wrong? So they go to the king, and they say, King, sign this order, and this law, as we've seen before, when we were studying the book of Esther, a law in the Medo-Persian Empire, once it was signed, could not be changed. It could be amended a little bit, but it could not be changed. So they signed this law specifically to trap Daniel, because they know Daniel will not pray to the king. He'll pray to his own God. And notice what it says. Daniel heard that the law went into effect. And what did he do? He did what he always did. Daniel went to his room and prayed to his God. He did not let the passage of an unjust law affect his duty to God. Now, I'm not advocating that you need to go out and start breaking laws. However, if a law is passed that directly contradicts the will of God, that is, if you can show me in the Bible where it says that we should not be doing what this law says to do, then you have a right to break that law. However, like Daniel, you must be willing to suffer the consequences for doing so. Daniel knew the law. He knew the consequences for breaking the law. And he did not let that get in the way of doing his duty to his God. So let's look at verses 11 to 13 to see what the men did when they knew that Daniel went ahead and prayed anyway. It says, "Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. So they approached the king and asked about his edict. 'Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den?' The king answered, 'As a law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable.' They then replied to the king, 'Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day.'" So I imagine what they did was they went and arrested Daniel, and then they went back to the king, but they probably kept Daniel in the back where the king couldn't see him. And they said, "Now, your majesty, didn't you sign this order? Didn't you just, give this order?" And the king agreed. They had the king, state it. So the king knows what's going on here. Yes, I signed this order. Anyone who prays to anybody except me for the next 30 days is going to be cast into the lion's den. And they said, "Okay." And they bring up Daniel. "We caught Daniel doing it. He's still praying to his God. He's not, praying to you. He's asking his God for things. He's not asking you for them. So you need to follow through with your order." So they not only trapped Daniel, they trapped the king. Because now the king has just agreed this is what the law is. He's agreed that the law cannot be changed. So what are we going to do about it? He has to follow through with his order. So let's finish up here then and look at verses 16, 17, and then 21 through 23. It says, "So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, 'May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you.' A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed." And then skipping to verse 21. "Then Daniel spoke with the king. 'May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him, and also before you, your majesty. I have not done harm.' The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God." So the king had to follow through with the order. It says he gave the order. Daniel was put into the den of lions. This was probably like a big hole in the ground, a cage down underground. Daniel was thrown in from the top, and then they put a big stone over the top of it to seal it shut. It says then he sealed it with his ring. This would mean that they probably took some ropes and they placed them over the stone to tie the stone down, sealed these ropes with wax, and then the king would take his signet ring, and it says also the rings of his nobles, and they would press them into the wax. And what that simply means is nobody could remove the ropes and remove the stone without breaking the wax. And when you break the wax, it would break the imprint in the wax of the king's seal. So first of all, you wouldn't be able to remove the stone without people noticing it, or at least coming to it later and saying, "Look, this has been broken." They would know if you had done it. And since it had the king's seal on it, then to do that would have been to directly defy the king. It would have been considered an act of treason. So they seal Daniel in. Daniel has faith. Daniel believes that his God can save him from the lions. But Daniel was willing to take this punishment anyway. Daniel, even if God did not save Daniel, then Daniel was still willing to take this punishment. Again, if you are going to break a law because you believe that law violates God's will, and again, be very careful with this. Make sure, don't just say, well, I'm doing this because this is what God wants. It has to be a case where obeying the law would directly violate the Bible, would violate Scripture. And If you do that, you must be willing to take whatever the punishment is. And that's what Daniel is doing here. But Daniel believed that God could save him. He didn't know if he would, but he believed that God could. And he told the king so. My God is able to save me. Whether he will or not, I don't know, but he's able to. And we know the king was very upset about this. It says the king was up all night worrying about Daniel in the den of the lions. And the next morning, it said the king went out. Interesting, it doesn't specifically say how long they're supposed to be in the lion's den. But to be safe, I guess the official said, let's leave them in there all night, just to make sure. The morning, the king went, he broke the seal, he removed the stone. And it says he called down, Daniel, was your God able to save you? And Daniel said, yes, my God was able to save me because in his eyes I had not done anything wrong. And even in your eyes, King, I have not done anything to harm you. Daniel was innocent before God, so God spared him. Does this mean God is always going to spare us from trouble? No. Does this mean that if we are caught in a situation where we have to defy authority in order to obey God, that God's going to protect us from the consequences? No. God's not always going to do that. He might, but not always. But we need to have faith that God will protect us. We are coming into hard times. It is getting harder and harder to be a Christian in today's world. Our beliefs are being attacked from every side. And it's just going to get worse. So we need to be willing, if it comes to it, like Daniel, to give our lives if necessary. Jesus said, if you want to be my follower, you must take up your cross and follow me. What does it mean to take up your cross? It means to be willing to carry your cross to the hill of execution and let them crucify you. It means you must be willing to die, if that's what it comes to. Daniel was. Daniel knew God could save him. God chose to save Daniel. And the aftermath of the story is the king realized, what was happening, that this order was given just as a way to get Daniel. So he took the chief advisors who were behind the plot, and he put them in the lion's den instead. And it says the lions immediately tore them to pieces. Is your faith strong enough that you're willing to suffer for Christ? Or will you just give in to whatever the world says? Are you willing to stand up for what's right? Or are you just going to go along with the crowd? We are called to be different. We are called to be noticeably Christian. We are called to point God to the world, to show God to the world. And if that means we have to suffer for it, then so be it. We must be willing to undergo that, if that's what it comes to. Next week, we're going to talk about confession and repentance. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next week.